to this interview with Tun Dr Mahathir. My name is Volker Friedrich. I'm the founder and CEO of GBP International, a strategy advisory and project management firm registered in Malaysia since 1997, and we work across Asia Pacific, but our home is Malaysia, and we are partner for mainly European companies going into the Asia Pacific region. So without further ado, enjoy the interview, and I appreciate your feedback or any questions. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Mahathir. Good morning.
Morning. Yes.
Very nice to meet
you. Anything to do for you?
There's everything. Every day there's something new, I think, these days, isn't it? Good morning.
Yeah.
Selamat pagi to you in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur.
Selamat pagi.
I'm here.
In Kuala
I'm sorry?
In KL.
No, I'm actually in Berlin now, in Germany.
In Berlin?
Yes, in Berlin. Very early morning for me, but it is my privilege to have the time with you today. And if you allow me, I give you a few words of introduction about myself, just 1 minute. I'm living and working in Kuala Lumpur since 1997, so I'm have a little bit of experience in Malaysia. My passport is still German, but my heart is Malaysian. So I feel a little bit like I belong to Malaysia in a way, and so I have been following your activities over all these years. My son was born in Kuala Lumpur in the Glen Eagles Hotel in the year 2000. And so today is a real honor and privilege for me to spend some time with you and have a casual, friendly discussion about things which are going on in this world. And obviously we are in a very special, unique situation, economically, health-wise, politically. And Malaysia is definitely in a very interesting period, to put it mildly. And so if you allow me, I would like to ask you a few questions about the political, economic scenario in Malaysia. But before I start, I'd like to ask you personally, how do you cope with the restrictions of the corona and the limitations we all have, and limited meetings, limited travel? I just heard from your colleague you have been spending the week in Langkawi, the weekend. So you must be in a good mood on a Monday morning after a weekend in Langkawi.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Well, this is unprecedented. We have never experienced this before.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have no way of fighting against this virus. We have no vaccine. The only way we can do is to distance ourselves from the source of the virus. That means having to be confined to our homes, our houses for the time being. And we, fortunately in Malaysia, people are quite disciplined. They are willing to accept direction by the government. This is different from what you see in the West, where your idea about freedom and all that is very strong. But in Malaysia, we still obey governments. So when the government says no movement out of the house, we stayed in the house for many months, for 3 months, 4 months. That was what I was doing. I was staying in my own house, and if I communicate at all, it is through the phone.
We have the internet these days.
We have Zoom. I can talk to all my children and grandchildren.
Very nice.
So because we were disciplined and we were able to reduce the incidence of new infection. So now the new infection has come down sometimes to just six people in a day. So the Malaysia now is quite free. So then they allow us to travel, but still within Malaysia only, not outside of Malaysia. Initially, not even between the different states, but now we can cross the border into another state.
Right.
So I was able to go to Langkawi for the first time after 4 months, because now we are allowed to travel, but only within the country.
Yeah,
so business picking up slowly. Of course, Malaysia depends so much upon foreign tourists, but foreign tourists cannot come, and therefore tourist industry, which is a very big contributor to the foreign exchange earnings of Malaysia, has been reduced to only a very small percentage now.
It's very,
so
very, very true, yeah.
Yeah, hotels and all the tourist industry, tourist guides and hotels and workers and all that, they have suffered. Some hotels have actually closed down, but a few are still open, but very few customers. But I believe that with care, discipline, keeping our distances, we can revive the economy much faster than some of the countries in Europe, Africa, and Latin America.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And in Germany and in other parts of the world, we have the same situation, that the cases are going down. People are getting more relaxed, restrictions are lifted, and all the businesses you just mentioned, they are very keen and eager to start moving again. So we all hope that there is no second wave coming and that we will not have the problem and we have to go back to square one, right?
Yes, we hope so.
Yeah. So Malaysia gets a lot of international credit how the government handled the crisis, and you mentioned it, very strict restraints, not allowed to move around, and the change in government came more or less at the very same time when the corona outbreak started. So if you would have stayed on as Prime Minister, would you have made any different decision than what the present government did in terms of managing the corona crisis?
Well,
or was it without alternative what they did?
Yeah, this is a new government. Obviously, they don't have the experience. I think most of the things they did is quite okay, especially with regard to the virus.
Right.
Fortunately, they allowed the professional people to manage this. This is managed by the doctors themselves. And so we were able to plan, the doctors were able to plan the approach to all the problems that we are faced. And the politicians did not take part in this except to make announcement. The other thing is, of course, with regard to the economy that is not doing so well, there are certain things which should be done, but it's not done. And then the management of the finances, I find, is not properly done. For example, they make promises, but they are not able to deliver. They said that they will have 230 billion ringgit to support the business. Actually, none of that money is available. So
it will be a heavy indebted budget, right?
Yeah.
But Malaysia is also in a kind of, I call it, let's say, a perfect storm, inverted commas. You know, you have the oil crash, so Petronas budget is much lower. You have the tourism breaking down basically to more or less zero, or maybe 20% of the previous years. You have the political uncertainty, I'd like to call it, at the moment. So it's definitely a situation Malaysia has never seen before, right?
Right. This is three different sources. First, the health problem, the economic problem, and the financial problem. All these come together, and it requires great skill to manage all these three together. And sometimes, of course, there is some shortage of ideas on how to deal with this problem.
Right. How do you look at the international cooperation? I mean, I'm in Germany now. You know, Germany is a very a big cornerstone of the European Union. In Asia or Southeast Asia, we have the ASEAN group of nations. But I think it's each and every country does its own policy and looks inbound only. I see very few initiatives which are, let's say, EU-wide or ASEAN-wide. And that comes together with the discussion about the new normal, the deglobalization, that each and every country is looking after themselves. What is your view on that? Are we going to see a revival of international cooperation, or will it be kind of my country first in the foreseeable future?
Well, in the case of health, we really need a borderless world, because we need to, people move around, but beyond that, the virus itself is crossing borders without our being able to stop them.
Right.
So this is a worldwide problem, and we should all cooperate in trying to find some remedial solution for this, like research to find vaccine or to find medicine for treatment. This will have to be with the cooperation of all the research laboratories of the world. And that means that it is really borderless in terms of the work on research. We can cooperate, we can give our results, and maybe testing needs to be done worldwide before we can discover some problem. But in the case of the economy, the market is down. So even if we recover and we are able to produce, there is no market to sell to, and transportation becomes a problem.
Right.
So I realized that in China, they started going back to work and to produce, but then they find that there is no market. You see, the market is shrunken because people are poor, and businesses are cutting down on their activities, so they don't need the components, parts, raw material, and all that as they used to. So even if you revive the productivity, you don't have the absorption, the capacity, the demand is not there. Yeah. So that is with regard to the economy. With regard to the finances, we find that people who used to earn some money on their own are now unable to function. Some of them cannot make a single cent even. I mean, these are the individuals who have some small businesses. They're not allowed to go out and do business, and they lost all their income. And for this, the government must come up with some aid. Some money must be given to them to keep them alive. And the public themselves must help feed some of these people, because they have no food even. So on the one hand, because business is down, the government is not earning enough money from the taxes and all that. On the other hand, government must spend more money to support people who are deprived of their means of earning a living. So these are the things that we have to look into. With regard to the finance, of course, government cannot collect the same amount of taxes. Business is not being done. The people are not making profit. In fact, they are losing money. So that is a problem both for the government as well as for the industries. We have now to change the way we do business. More business will be done online, for example. All the marketing will be done online. In some areas, that is very good. For example, Malaysia is the biggest producer of gloves in the world. That is doing well. We also produce masks and sanitary products and things like that. Those areas, they are doing well. The demand for gloves is very big. The glove makers here are very, very rich now.
Yes. Do you think the government should put an extra tax on these profits just to help to balance the government budget? I'm sure they won't like it, but that may be
Yeah. But we have to observe first before we make any decision. At least I'm not in the government, but I think the government should watch carefully, because when we impose new taxes, the people, many people will be affected. See, when production is high, it's not only the company which makes money, workers and all that have jobs. But if you uh, uh, pressure them and all that, apply pressure on them, not only with the company, but the workers and all that will suffer.
I think it's really, I mean, I'm an economist myself, so it really sounds like a vicious circle, you know. And like you say, if there's no demand, supply cannot balance with demand. On the other hand, we see that the human beings are always very creative, and there have been crises before, and the world always came out of this crisis and did better. I'm talking about the time in Germany, especially after the war or after other pandemics, after the Asian financial crisis. Malaysia came out stronger. So we all hope for positive developments, and that people probably get creative, identify new services, create new products. So let's be optimistic about it, that this downturn will not be too severe.
Yeah, we're lucky in that we have entered the information age, where facilities are very, very good. Now you can have conferences without moving from your house or from your office, and like we are doing now.
That's right.
You can be in Germany and I can be here, and we can discuss things. So even meetings can be held, board meetings can be held, and Zoom system allows us to have so many people talking. So that is very good. The other thing is the ability to market now is better, because you don't even need to advertise in the papers. Online, you can advertise, promote, and receive orders and deliver. One of the things that should do well is the freight business. People will want to buy things, and they will order by online, and then you have to ship the products across continents. And I think
do you do that yourself? Do you order your food or your books via the online shopping, or?
Yeah, mostly online shopping now. For during the time when we were confined to our houses, of course, we buy food from the restaurants, which only take away. They only allow you to take away the food. Nobody in the restaurant, and that kind of business is doing quite well.
Very good. Okay. I'd like to change subject a little bit, if you don't mind, and I would like to look up north to the big neighbor, to China. And China, of course, is a very important part in Malaysia's businesses for the decades. And one of your first actions when you started again in 2018 was to travel to China and renegotiate some of the projects which were under the Belt and Road Initiative. And of course, this is a mega project by China, and that has to be seen with the US trade conflict, China's strategic interests in the world. And I'd like to ask you from a European perspective, because China is also entering into European infrastructure projects. They are buying harbors, logistical centers, power plant, transmission lines. And Europe, I have to share with you, is a little bit sensitive and very reluctant to welcome these investments. What would be your take? What would be your opinion? How should Europe deal with China when they are not really comfortable, to say the least?
Well, China is there. There's no way you can sort of ignore it. Malaysia, of course, has been a neighbor of China for the past 2,000 years. And we have always been trading with them. We used to produce jungle products in exchange for lacquerware, brassware, and things like that with China. So it's a continuation of the tradition of looking at China as a market, as a supplier, as well as a market. It's a big market, 1.4 billion people. And they are very productive. And they, although they may, per capita income may be low, but the numbers are very big. So we look upon China as a big market. And now, of course, because of being a big market, they have accumulated a lot of capital and also a lot of technology, and they can invest. So we look to China again for investment, because investment is not coming from America, not coming from Europe. So China has provided the foreign direct investment that we require. So China is there, and we have to learn to live with China. Of course, some of its behavior is not something that we like, but we have to make certain adjustments because it is a very big, very powerful nation. In fact, China is a world unto itself. It can use that 1.4 billion people as a huge market for their own business, but they want to expand to the rest of the world. And I think the attitude of America towards China is not very productive. I think we have to accept that China is going to grow, is going to play a very important part in world affairs. The question is, how do we make adjustment? We have to compete. Europe and America must compete with China. In terms of technology, Europe is still far ahead in many ways, so is America. I think it's a technology part that you have the advantage. On the production side, I think China has the advantage, which is why many American and European companies site their production in China because the cost is lower. Over the years, your cost of production has gone up because of the standard demanded by your workers. So your products cannot compete with Chinese product. Once the Chinese acquire good technology, then it's difficult to compete with them. So you have to learn how to reduce your costs, maybe through automation, robotics, and things like that, so that your cost becomes lower and you can compete in the international market. What I see is that Japan, Korea, and China, and also Taiwan, between them have grabbed the market. They have been able to acquire the technology and the quality that can compete with European and American products. That I think Europe and America must realize and find ways to compete with China.
Yeah, that's also what I see on our client base, that sometimes they are surprised how far ahead these markets are and these companies, also in terms of technology, at a much, much lower cost base. And that, of course, is also a cause for conflict here and there, because nobody wants to give away market share. But that's a different subject and a different story altogether. We have read about some cases where especially American companies are deciding to remove their factories from China, and they relocate back to Southeast Asia, including Malaysia and Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore. They're all eyeing these foreign direct investments. So is it possible that Malaysia may be like a secret winner of the US-China conflict when you receive these factories who are closing in China and open up again in Southeast Asia?
We are not getting as much as we would like to get from the American companies manufacturing in China and moving out. But Chinese companies are going out also, and they are investing in foreign countries. In Malaysia, if we allow them, they would dominate the foreign direct investment segment of the economy. But some of the American and European companies have moved to other Southeast Asian countries. And I think definitely we are the alternative. Our cost is higher than China, but I think by comparison with Europe and America, moving to Southeast Asia is much better in terms of productivity and cost.
Right, yeah. Well, that is also part of my job, and I'm following the trade missions from Malaysia to all the European cities ever since you were the Prime Minister before, when Rafida Aziz was your Minister of International Trade and Investment. And I must admit that I always feel a little bit sad when I talk to my European friends and business partner when I notice that they hardly know anything about Malaysia. Malaysia is not really visible or not really existent in the, say, European media. And unfortunately, I also have to say, if there is some news, usually it is not so nice news, no? Some scandals popping up. And of course, the media likes to report about bad news. I'm not saying fake news, but bad news sells. And it's not always true. There's always an element of truth in it. You can't deny. But how can Malaysia improve that perception and change the people's mindset about Malaysia? I'm trying to help as much as I can, but I'm only a small fly in this market. And I'm not talking about doubling or tripling the budget for MIDAR and trade shows. I think the perception that really is saddening me sometimes, you know, how poorly Malaysia is regarded in some cases. And the opposite is true. I know Malaysia for over 20 years, and I'm always very positive about it.
We need more people like you to come and stay in Malaysia.
Yeah.
Because if you don't stay in Malaysia, you don't realize that this is a country with almost developed country infrastructure, but the cost is 1/3. You know, so cheap. It is so cheap here. Even hotels are very, very cheap in Malaysia. It is only 1/3 the cost of going to Singapore or to other countries. But it is not well known. It's not well known. Our ability to keep the cost of living low is something that I think Malaysia can be proud of. The cost of living here is very low. And yet we have the basic infrastructure, water supply, electricity, roads, rails, all these are in place. So it is better to come to Malaysia than to go to, well, Singapore. For example, the cost there is higher. Also, the facilities here are as good as the facilities in Singapore and other places. Communication is very good.
Yeah.
We have the most advanced communication system in place already. So you can do business here and use our communication to cover the rest of the world. And you have a good set of, we are actually very business friendly, but foreign business friendly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's you. Yeah.
I would like to see more Europeans put their representatives here and live here. I mean, you live here, I mean, your cost of living is very, very low.
It's not only the cost, it's not only the cost, it's also the quality of life you can enjoy in Malaysia and the region. And you don't have to convince me, I have to say. For me, the decision is very clear. But we also, of course, we have a lot of European companies, big companies, Siemens, B. Braun, Infineon, just to name a few, who actually have done what you just described. And they are all very happy. They are expanding every year their capacity. So that is good. But I think there can be much more, you know, and that is something definitely we would like to help. Yeah. I'd like to draw you back in time a little bit. One of my favorite papers I read from yourself was the Vision 2020 strategy, which was developed in the, let's say, early 90s. And I think it's a kind of a supervision that we are seeing you in the year 2020 in the position you are in. So I'd like to look with you into the crystal ball and say, if you were to write under today's circumstances, the vision, let's say 2050, what would be your cornerstones of that new strategy? What would be the hypothetical thinking, the foresight, how the world is going to develop and how we want to design it? Because obviously the world is not a perfect place, neither in Malaysia, nor in Germany, nor anywhere else. And everybody has homework to do. So what would be your concept of a Vision 2050, if I like to call it that way?
Well, I was fortunate in that I had almost 22 years leading the country. So the changes are progressive to improve things. But then we need to change the government. So I resigned to give a chance for newcomers to take the helm. But then they decided not to focus on 2020. They wanted to have their own legacy, their own plan to be able to say that this is done by them and all that. And that has led to wrong policies. So Vision 2020 should have been achieved by the year 2020. But unfortunately, because of a lack of focus on the vision, even though all the things have already been put in place, they change the direction. And when they change direction, and sometimes, of course, there is bad government, like a lot of corruption, a lot of wrong decisions being made. All these things frustrated the plan. So now we have to practically begin all over again. And we think that by the year 2030, we should achieve Vision 2020. So we'll be 10 years late. But we expect that we can not only catch up, but go ahead, provided there is political stability. At this moment, unfortunately, we are where the new government has got very little experience about economic development or financial management. Yeah, this is what is holding us back.
And you mentioned before, for the Corona crisis, you were kind of favorable, and you said they are consulting with the experts, with the scientists and the researchers, the doctors. Do you see them also getting advice from, say, experienced economists or financial people, or are they trying to manage the economy and the finance with their own resources?
You know, one of the things we were critical of Najib was his way of appointing politicians to head government institutions, government companies, and all that. So during the 2 years I was heading the PH government, we changed all that. Most of the chairmen of companies were now professionals, people with experience and with the qualification to run businesses or institutions. Unfortunately, the moment this new government took over, they sacked all those people and replaced them with politicians who have no knowledge about how to do business or to run institutions. So I'm afraid that this is going to affect the development of the country. So we need to go back to having professionals. The politicians, these are rewards for politicians who support the government. And we did away with that when we were in the government before. The PH government decided that we should not appoint politicians to head government companies or government institutions. That was done, but now it's gone back to the same old pattern.
Yeah. Well, there's a phrase which is called the new normal after the coronavirus situation. So I kind of say, is this a new normal in Malaysia, the old traditional, if I may say so, way? We don't know, and time will tell, isn't it?
We thought we had changed during the 2 years that we had the PH government. We thought that we had established new normal even before the COVID-19. But now, of course, it's more on digitalization, on internet business and all that, on online marketing, things like that. New ways of doing business. But you need people with, especially young people, who are much more willing and capable of accepting new ideas. You see, the old people want to do the same thing in the old normal way, but the new normal way is different. But the young people are adapting, and we see some of them doing well also.
Yeah, there's one subject I'd like to ask you also about, and this is about, let's say, the sustainability discussion. Before the Corona discussion came up, we saw a big movement regarding global warming or against global warming, ethical business, less problematic supply chain or production waste. I have a little bit of a worry, I have to say, that because many companies are now fighting for survival, that all these initiatives which have been started and which have been supported from all sides of life, that we will forget about them, you know, because it's about pure survival at the end of the day, and doing, let's say, good for less pollution, less CO2 emissions, and these type of activities. From your discussion with corporate leaders, do you see that this is the case, or can the young generation with Greta Thunberg, I'm sure you know the name of that young lady, are they going to have a revival when people are not talking about Corona so much anymore?
I think the pandemic itself has had some effect on reducing global warming, for example, because the demand for power is less now.
Right.
So you don't have to burn that much coal or fuel oil. But can we sustain that? Once the economy recovers, the demand for power will be going up. Right. If you switch over to renewable energy, like solar panels, wind power and all that, and grow that, and do not go back to the fossil fuel, I think we would be able to sustain the lowering the emission carbon dioxide. But this will have to be studied very carefully by experts, because the whole way of doing things, of doing business is changing. How does it affect the demands? Demand for power, demands for infrastructure and all that, which in turn can generate heat, carbon dioxide. So we need to be very serious about this. The unfortunate thing is that we used to look at America as a model. Today, America is not a model. It is antithesis of a model. I mean, they actually at first regarded this COVID-19 as a flu, and it is not flu. And you see what's happening in Brazil and the poor countries of Africa. The world now is really globalized. You cannot think only about your own country, because what happens in your country affects your neighbor, affects even distant neighbors. And what happens in distant neighbors also affect you. So the world truly has become globalized. And unless we think in terms of international policies and not just national policies, I think we are going to have a problem trying to avoid the rise in ambient temperature and things like that.
Okay, very interesting. We are coming to the end of our time. So if you allow, I would just like to start a sentence very briefly, and you just complete the sentence spontaneously, if you may. So my first question is, if I were 50 years younger than today, I would?
Well, I would value my environment much more than I did 50 years ago.
Okay. A little bit of a political question. I hope that Anwar Ibrahim.
Well, he is in line to become Prime Minister, but of course, his problem is that his popularity has gone down quite a bit, and for popular support, he may not be able to achieve.
Okay. And if I think of Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew, I think
Singapore would still do well because they are a small unit, very compact, and they have very good technicians working there. And the government is very aware of the contribution of the professionals in the development of Singapore.
Okay. And if I become Prime Minister for the third time, I would?
Well, I would look again at what has happened during the interim period and see what should be the new normal.
And my recommendation for my grandchildren and the younger generation of today is
to value your environment, because you are going to live in it, you are going to grow in it, and if the environment becomes unsustainable, then you are going to have problems.
Okay, so I think your life and your career is remarkable. I think in all aspects, and I really believe that you have so much knowledge to share and discuss. I could talk with you for days if I have the time. And but I'm also a German, as you have heard before. So do you have any memories of Germans or Germany? You have been to our country a few times, not so recently, if I'm correctly informed. What is your association, apart from a car in Germany?
I always admire the meticulous attention to details and the value you place on quality. That is very important. That is why German products are highly valued, because you know your engines and all that, they function extremely well. It's the standard for the whole world.
Okay. And my final question, I would like to ask you, if you look back to all your activities and all your travels and meetings, is there anything, any meeting, any personality you have met standing out for you if you look backwards?
Well, I always admire Nelson Mandela, a man who was jailed but did not hold a grudge against the jailers and preferred to work with them to rebuild his country.
Okay. So any final message from you to our European friends here in Germany and the European Union, other than we should invest more than in Malaysia?
Well, there was a time when the world was Eurocentric. Today, it is not Eurocentric, but Europe must understand that the world is smaller and you have to work with the rest of the world. Not dominate it, but work with the rest of the world, because everything that happens in one country will affect the other countries near and far.
Okay, I think this is a wonderful closing remark. Tun Dr Mahathir, I thank you very much indeed. It was my pleasure. I hope we have a chance to meet personally when I'm allowed to come back to Malaysia. And I really wish you all the best. Greetings to your family and friends, and to my Malaysian friends as well. Thank you very much indeed, and have a nice day. Thank you for sharing this with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is the end of our conversation with Tun Dr Mahathir. Thank you very much for listening, and we are